Time has come for Charlie's Baseball Emporium. Here is Charlie Vascellaro. My name is Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and I am proud to introduce Charlie's third show, Charlie's Baseball Emporium. Here's Charlie Vascellaro.
Hey, Ralph, how's it going today?
I'm doing pretty well. Thanks for your fine effort. The Rolly Hemond interview was absolutely terrific. You brought out a humanity in the man, and hope you can get him back and continue.
He's a national treasure.
Absolutely.
And I will be hanging out with him again shortly. When I go back to Arizona for the spring, I always catch a few games with Roland, and we like to sit with the scouts.
Nice. Charlie, tell me, and you've been on my show many times over the years. I don't recall, what is your earliest baseball memory? Just to have people get to know you a little bit when you were a kid.
Well, I was a child of the Mets in the 70s. I grew up in Brooklyn and Queens when I was little, and then we moved out to Long Island. And my first baseball memories revolve around the Mets of the early 70s. My favorite team still to this day of all time is the 1973 Mets. They lost in 7 games to the Oakland A's in the World Series, even though they had a 3-2 lead. They lost games 6 and 7 back in Oakland, which was a drag. But that team was a magical team, and that's the gotta believe Mets. They squeaked into the playoffs that year.
With McGraw, and they were so far behind early on. Yogi was about to lose his job. They pulled it together. They became healthy. And you're right. That is a team. I'm a Met fan myself, and I was out in California at that time. And it was actually Game 6 was the only World Series game I've ever attended in my life.
Oh, you were at that horrible game.
That was heartbreaking. That was absolutely heartbreaking.
Yeah. I think Bert Campaneris.
Man, they were going to lose the next day. There was no question about that, because momentum has a funny way. And momentum was all A's after that. And,
well, we talk about this. Yogi messed with the rotation because he pushed Seaver up a day to pitch Game 6, which I still think was a big mistake.
As it turned, looking back, words. But that day, though, I remember Charlie Finley and Jack Benny sitting in the box, throwing out the first ball. Jack Benny, for one reason or another, throw out the first ball of that game, and I left.
Did I lose you?
Oh no, I'm here.
There was a gap in. I didn't hear what you said. You said you left.
Oh, I left the Coliseum. I lived in Danville, California, and I could hardly see the drive. I was so disturbed as a Met fan, and I was an adult, for crying out loud. But that was a very, very gutsy Met team. Willie did more for them than he gets credit for. And Yogi did the job. Fine, you know.
Well, yeah, my favorite player was the catcher, Jerry Grody, and he was injured for part of that year, but he was very much a backbone of what was going on with that team. You know, you needed guys like him. He handled that pitching staff very well, and he was a tough guy who brought a sense of discipline and a little bit of authority even to what was going on there. And McGraw coining that phrase, "You got to believe," which came. M. Donald Grant, the president of the team, had come down to the clubhouse, I'm going to say sometime in August, and the Mets were floundering along, and he gave him a little bit of a lecture. And McGraw started this "You Gotta Believe" chant, and some people didn't know if he was making a mockery of things, if he was goofing off, and making fun of what Grant was saying to them, or if he meant it sincerely, that he thought that they could, come back and get in it, which I think there was a combination of both of those things. I think he was trying to lighten the mood a little bit.
Also, I would think the other way. In other words, him making a mockery of it, much more so at the time. But it did catch on with the fans.
Yes.
And it was kind of cool.
And it caught on with the sign man, too, Carl Earhart, who used to carry the signs. You remember him. And he was down there.
I wrote a blog with him when he passed away about him, probably about 7-8 years ago at least. The sign man would always have the perfect sign out, and quickly as well. And he became a legend, as did other folks that would sit in Met audiences, like Pearl Bailey, for instance.
I think of the sign man as kind of our conscience. He was our he was our collective consciousness. He was summing up what everybody was thinking succinctly. He had his finger on the pulse of the team and the fans, and his reactions were our reactions. That's what he was. They were ours. He wrote it out so we didn't all have to, and it was a symbolic gesture. That the sign man hung up there for everybody to see, and it was always just what you were thinking.
Right. Hey, Charlie, you're a New York guy. How'd you end up in Baltimore?
Well, I ended up in Baltimore by way of Arizona. First, my family moved to Arizona when I was a teenager, and so I had left Long Island. I was a heartbroken Mets fan when we got to Arizona. And my father moved the family there for business reasons, and it all worked out well. But at the time, I was, the thing I missed the most was the Mets and Shea Stadium. I couldn't imagine that I was going to live somewhere where there was no major league team, and I couldn't go see the Mets with any kind of regularity. So I was upset. But I did make a fantastic discovery shortly after my arrival in Arizona, which was spring training baseball. Which has become my lifelong love now. And so that wasn't such a bad thing. And then my interest in baseball as a kid in Arizona led me to pursue a journalism degree, to become a sports writer. And I majored in baseball at Arizona State University from the standpoint of covering the game and writing about it. And one thing led to another. And I ended up taking a job in Baltimore doing public relations for the Orioles minor league teams. But I think that all came as a result of my studies in Arizona and the work I was doing in Arizona.
Wow, very, very interesting baseball career, as it were. You went into it because the love for baseball came first. You didn't become a journalist and then get into writing about baseball. You went into it to write about baseball. Exactly.
And I did do some writing. When you're working for a newspaper and you're a college kid, you have to cover whatever it is you're assigned to cover. I wrote about a lot of high school sports when I was younger. I stood on the sidelines at high school football games and followed the line of scrimmage with a big yellow pad on a clipboard and wrote down where the ball was and who ran the ball or who passed the ball. So I had to do those things. The first story I ever covered professionally was a boxing match. at a hotel in Scottsdale, which I had saw a flyer hanging up in a men's room at a sports bar, promoting this fight. And I called the local paper and asked if they needed anybody to cover it, and they sent me out to cover it. So I was a baseball man, of course.
Moxie carries people through and gets you started. I mean, some people would look at that and go, well, yeah, that would be nice if I were a sports writer or something. You made yourself a sports writer.
Yeah, I ripped that flyer off. It was hanging on top of the urinal. So it was right in my eyes, you know. And so I saw this flyer promoting a fight in Scottsdale, Arizona, which I didn't think that we had too much of that back then. And it was of interest to me. I was in Tempe, Arizona at a sports bar called McDuffie's at the time. And that was the place we would go after class, sometimes before class, to watch ball games and whatnot. And I was in this room.
Who were some of the college players that you covered when you were writing for Arizona?
Well, ASU had a lot of great players pass through the college. Now, I was not necessarily covering these guys when they were there, but I'm aware of the legacy, which includes Reggie Jackson, Rick Monday, Sal Bando, all those Oakland A's we were just talking about. Barry Bonds, of course, played there. Oda B. McDowell was a star player.
You also had that who was the football coach, Cush, who
yes.
Instrumental in promoting racism.
Yeah, controversial and legendary. There was all sorts of a lot of.
If you got to be infamous for something, it might as well be that. What can I tell you? But interesting days. You had a football player, McClendon. What was his name? A linebacker.
Well, it's not ringing a bell. Like I said, I was more of a baseball man, but I certainly remember some of these guys.
So you were there when Sal Bando and Reggie were there, or?
No, I came later. I'm a little younger than those guys, but their pictures were hanging on the wall. Their numbers were retired out on the wall in the outfield. So that was the legacy of the campus. Oda B. McDowell was probably pretty close to when I was there, I would say, and then Bonds, similar, a little bit. I was late getting to the college because I went to the community college first. Bonds and I are probably not that far apart in years, but he would have been there at the time as well. And they've always had a pretty successful baseball program.
Oh, no question. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And from there to Baltimore.
Yes.
Now, how'd that come about?
I was writing about Babe Ruth, Baltimore's favorite son. And I left Arizona to cover a Babe Ruth's birthday party. Babe Ruth's birthday party was taking place here in Baltimore, and I was writing a story for a cigar magazine. Babe Ruth loves cigars, so it was an easy sell. And I went to an event at the Havana Club, which was in the Ruth Chris Steakhouse here in Baltimore, this very an upscale club where you could smoke cigars and eat steaks. It was kind of an old world kind of place, and very much in line with its name, the Havana Club. And I went to this party, and while I was there, I met the owner of the Orioles minor league affiliates, and we struck up a friendship, and he asked me to come out and do public relations, direct the public relations departments for his 3 minor league affiliates, and that was the Bowie Bay Sox and the Frederick Keys and the Delmarva Shorebirds. So I came to Baltimore to take that job.
Very, very cool. And they were all minor league teams of the Orioles, and one owner owned all 3 teams.
Yes, one ownership group. And when they first started this company, which was called Maryland Baseball LLC at the time, it was kind of a revolutionary way of doing business in the minor leagues. The idea of bringing all your affiliates within a 30, 40-mile radius of the home team's ballpark started to make a lot of sense to people. And, Double A, the Bowie Double A team in the Eastern League, the Prospect League, that was a pipeline. The ball players would go right from Bowie off into the big league. Sometimes they would skip that AAA step, which for a while was in Rochester, and later Norfolk. So it bounced around a little bit, the AAA affiliation, but these other teams, the 2 single-A teams and the 1 double-A team, have remained from all this time still Orioles affiliates. Sometimes affiliations change, but these ones just make too much sense.
Beautiful. Hey, let's talk about the Hall of Fame in the AFL.
Yes, the Cactus League Hall of Fame, the spring training circuit, Arizona's spring training circuit, this year is turning 70.
The Cactus League. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, the Cactus League. Yeah, we were talking about the Arizona Fall League back in November. This is the Cactus League. And
okay.
Spring training baseball came to Arizona. This year the league is celebrating its 70th anniversary, which is amazing to me. I've witnessed about half of that in my lifetime. I spent about 35 years so far, maybe even a little bit more, watching the Cactus League. So this 70-year-old spring training circuit, I've been able to witness firsthand for about half of its existence, maybe even a little bit more. And 1947, the year it started, there was only 2 teams. It was the Cleveland Indians and the New York Giants, and they were owned by Bill Veeck and Horace Stoneham, who kind of agreed to a partnership, so to speak, in bringing their teams out to Arizona so they'd have another team to play against. You know, you can't just have one. So They made this agreement. And some of the reasoning behind this, 1947, as you well know, was also the first year of Jackie Robinson breaking the Major League Baseball's color barrier. So you have big things going on. The game is moving into what I would refer to as the modern era. This is the beginning of the modern era, in my mind, because pre-integration baseball is way different than post-integration baseball. And Bill Veeck's team, the Indians, Larry Doby made his debut just 11 weeks after Jackie Robinson during 1947. He showed up in the middle of the season. So in 48, he would have made his first appearance in Arizona as a member of the Indians during spring training, and they trained down in Tucson. So Doby was a pioneer, very much the same as Robinson, and when he got to Arizona, he was basically by himself there. Satchel Paige showed up, and Luke Easter, a few guys, and then when the Giants arrived, they brought Monty Irvin a few years later and Willie Mays. And then the Cubs and Hank Thompson, and the Cubs became the third team to have spring training in Arizona. They showed up in 1952, and a couple of years later, Ernie Banks was with them. So this year, the Cactus League...
And his second base partner was a guy named
Gene Baker,
who came up through what they called in those days the Negro Leagues.
All the guys I mentioned played in the Negro Leagues before they played in the major leagues. Doby, Irvin, Mays, and Banks. They were all crossover players.
Ironically, when Jackie and these guys crossed the line, and it was crossing a line, believe me, it killed off within a few years one of the biggest industries, actually 2 of the biggest industries. Negro League Baseball had teams all over and franchises. That died. And the black press, as it was known then, which covered the Negro Leagues, ended up dying.
Well, to some extent. No, I mean, to some extent, papers like the Baltimore Afro-American and the Washington, D.C. Afro-American paper, where the great Sam Lacey, who lived with Jackie Robinson on the road, he continued to cover. And what they did was they did not have necessarily the Negro Leagues to cover anymore, although it did last for a few more years. The Negro Leagues lasted for about 5 more years after Jackie Robinson's breakthrough. But the focus then shifted for these reporters, guys like Wendell Smith and Sam Lacey, to covering the African-American players in the major leagues for the African-American newspapers. it was a decidedly different type of coverage. When you go to the archives and read these papers, what they then started covering were issues of segregation. Players who could not stay in the same hotels as their teams, could not eat in the same restaurants as their teams. This became the focus of the coverage that guys like Lacey and Smith were now doing for the African American newspapers. They weren't just doing game stories about Negro Leagues teams. They were talking more now about social and cultural issues.
You know,
I lost you again, Ralph. Are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, there was about 10, 15 seconds of dead air there for a second.
I've been talking. I was just going to say, Sam, Charlie, that segregation, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, that Jackie and those other players felt when they first came up continued well into the 60s. For instance, in St. Petersburg, where the Yankees and the Cardinals trained, there was a big thing. Players like Bill White and Curt Flood, they had to go elsewhere, and for a long time could not eat in the same hotel rooms, and it basically reciprocated the move that the Yankees made to Fort Lauderdale for their spring training. Big racism all over the country, overt and covert, and it goes on to this day. Very tough for the players that followed Jackie coming up.
This was the original motivation behind Veeck and Stonem's move to Arizona as well. Bill Veeck had a bad experience in the bleachers in Florida, in Ocala, Florida, when he owned the Milwaukee Brewers, which was a minor league team at the time. As Bill Veeck was wont to do, he preferred to sit in the stands with fans when he was at games. He didn't like sitting up in the owner's box or in the press box. He preferred to sit with the fans. And on one occasion in Florida, he was sitting in the left field bleachers with black fans, and then was told by local law enforcement officials that he wasn't allowed to sit there. This was the guy who owned the team.
Right.
So he said, "Oh, really?" And he explained to them how he begged to differ with them about that, and he did refuse to move. And he also took it a step further. The mayor of the town was brought over to tell him that he wasn't allowed to sit there. And Veeck hit him where it hurt, right in the wallet. He said, if you really want to go through with this, I could take my team elsewhere. And then that was that. But the seed had been planted in his head. He was not comfortable there anymore. And he decided now it's time to go. And when he then in turn bought the Cleveland Indians, he already owned some land in Tucson. He had been spending time there in a form of semi-retirement out in Tucson, and he thought maybe this would be an easier place for us to have spring training where the Jim Crow laws were not as strict. Mm-hmm. And Stoneham also, both of these teams, the Giants and the Indians, were two of the most heavily integrated teams early on. Veeck and Stoneham were forerunners in this. Of the first 20 or so players signed, 20 or so black players signed, I'd say half of them were signed by either Veeck or Stoneham in the early years of integration. So that's what happened here.
I can think of, including Pope and a few others, right off the top of my head.
Right off the bat, and they were both very aggressive about it. And this ceremony that's going on this year, this Cactus League Hall of Fame induction, which the four guys who are being inducted to the Cactus League Hall of Fame this year are in order: Larry Doby, Monty Irvin, Willie Mays, and Ernie Banks. These four guys were pioneers out there in Arizona and paved the way. And I'm working on a story right now about the integration of spring training in Arizona. And this deals with all of these issues that we're talking about right now. when Dobie showed up in Tucson, he had to live in this very small black neighborhood that they had in Tucson over by the Dunbar School, which was the grade school for the small African-American community that existed in Tucson. This is where the kids went to school. Dobie lived in that neighborhood when he was not allowed to stay in the hotel with the team. Willie Mays in Phoenix stayed in a house that was owned by some friends of his who had moved from Alabama, from the same town, Westfield, Alabama, that Mays was from. Some other people he knew had already moved to Phoenix, so he stayed in their house in South Phoenix. It was located right next door to the Elks Lodge, which was the Black Elks Lodge. This is where the players were welcome, the early African-American players. I spoke with Bill White. You mentioned him before. I talked with him last week about this, and he said that's the only place they went. By the time White arrived, which was a few years after Mays, the team hotel had become integrated. The Adams Hotel in Phoenix agreed to accept the black players only under the threat of Stoneham taking his business elsewhere. So that's how progress is made. And Bill White, it's not that these people had all these altruistic motives. This is business. They didn't want to lose the business.
Not like these hotel owners or these restaurant owners, like blacks, saw the light, got to know.
We'd like to think it was that way, but no, they just didn't want to lose the business.
It would. If maybe they sat down once and had a conversation with somebody that didn't look exactly like them. Maybe they didn't.
I will say that baseball assisted in this process. Here you've got Willie Mays, who was an instant hero with the Giants in the 50s. And you're going to tell Willie Mays he can't stay in the hotel with the team? So I think eventually some common sense comes into play, I would hope. And
let me take time out, Nix, on that. If baseball was so good about caring about integration, when Willie first came out to California, and we're talking, this is later than the years when the New York Giants,
yes,
with Cleveland,
and I know what you're going to say.
He couldn't
go ahead.
buy a house in St. Francis,
couldn't buy a house
in San Francisco, because not because he didn't have the money, not because he didn't have the down payment. It was strictly at that point a matter of his color. And you could take it to any city. You want to go to a northern city of Boston, how they treated Bill Russell in so many horrible ways that you couldn't imagine. And like I say, overt and covert depends on what.
Now, on the flip side of that coin, I'm going to say this: the fact that Mays was a baseball player in Arizona and other places, it did assist in helping to accelerate the integration process. Now, not because of altruistic motives, just because of business. The idea was, I don't think the Adams Hotel would have opened up to blacks before Mays or any time shortly thereafter if it wasn't for the fact that he was a professional baseball player of very high profile. I don't think they would have just said,
the owners bought the space in the hotel.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So this is where baseball helps, and this is where these guys were put in a position to become pioneers, to become part of the civil rights movement, well ahead of the actual civil rights movement, but to help become part of that. The fact that these guys were forcing hotels, their presence and the business associated with their presence was forcing hotels to become integrated well before the civil rights bill was passed into law. That's 1964 that Lyndon Johnson signed that. So this is a full 10 years, maybe even 15 years before that progress is actually being made for business reasons, but it was being made.
May I quote Martin Luther King when someone referred to him lovingly as the father of the civil rights movement? He said, no, the father of the civil rights movement was Jackie Robinson. Without Jackie Robinson, this would have been delayed for X number of years.
And that's what we're talking about here. This is the gist of what we're talking about here. And guys like Larry Doby, who does not get enough credit because he only showed up 11 weeks later, and there was no interleague play at the time. You had Jackie Robinson in the National League, and you had Larry Doby in the American League. And so everything that Robinson was experiencing.
Didn't play as storied a team as Bums from Brooklyn.
That's also true, but I'll also say this. Larry Doby's Cleveland Indians won the World Series in his first full season with the team, 1948.
Yes.
He had an immediate impact on that team. And
as did Satchel Paige. As a matter of fact.
And this was, we'll give Bill Veeck credit too, because I think Bill Veeck doesn't get the same type of recognition that Branch Rickey gets. Bill Veeck tried to buy the Philadelphia Phillies in 1946, and he wanted to make them an all-Negro team in the major leagues. That was his intention. The owners didn't let him do that, but he was thinking about this stuff all along. And Horace Stoneham also was a great proponent for the minority players in baseball with regards to signing Latino players and Asian players quite early on. So I think that Stoneham gets lost in the shuffle here a little bit too.
As a matter of fact, Stoneham signed the Alus. I wonder if he didn't put off bringing those guys up until they moved to San Francisco. In 58, 57, they could have brought some of those young players up and improved themselves. They were horrible before they moved. Stoneham does get credit. He signed a fellow by the name of Masanori Murakami.
Yes.
He was the first Japanese pitcher, I think the first player, I know the first pitcher to pitch in the majors, and late 60s with mid 60s, I'd say 64, 65, 6 with the Giants. He does not get as much credit as Branch Rickey, as does Bill Veeck. If we had to have a bibliography to this show, I would say the book Veeck is in Rec. That would be one. There's a book that I keep near me all the time. It's called Crossing the Line, Black Major Leaguers from 1947 to 1959. And
Larry Mulkey and Jonathan Kronstadt, I'm holding it in my hand right now.
Are you kidding me? I am as well. I'm reading it.
Here's the sound of it. That's the sound of the pages flipping.
All right, here's the pages from the side.
There you go.
That is
a fantastic reference.
It is the most accurate reference book I've ever read. You know, as we are both obviously avid crazies, nuts, or whatever, and readers, you know that to find a book with absolutely no mistakes, I jot down notes if there's a mistake in a book.
Yeah.
You couldn't find one here. It is done beautifully. It gives a page, maybe a page and a half, average.
It's concise. It's concise and precise, and it also runs in a fantastic chronological manner. It takes you through that decade a little bit more, 1947 to 1959, in such a logical progression. It's just seamless. It is. I love this book.
All right, and I'll just mention one other book. I probably mention it 3 times a week. It's called Willie's Time, and it was written by Charles Einstein. And the chapters are all presidents, like Herbert Hoover, if I'm not mistaken, was the first president in Willie's day. And it takes you all the way through to LBJ, and I think it doesn't go beyond LBJ. It's a beautifully written book. It could be a textbook in any school in America, and as an aside to it, talks about Willie's life. But talks about the way things were in America, and that would be the other one.
I tapped into another book which I did not own, but I do now, the Larry Doby biography, which is called Pride and Prejudice by a guy named Joseph Thomas Moore, which has really also shed a lot of light on Doby's kind of the untold story of Larry Doby. You just don't hear as much about him. And I'm enjoying it.
Because you don't, and it was a shame. I think when he passed, he was working for the New York Nets or New Jersey Nets at that time as a PR guy or something. He's out of bait. My point is, couldn't be hired in baseball. It's Larry frickin' Doby, you know?
Well, Doby has, this unique distinction of always being the second guy. So he was the second guy behind Jackie Robinson, right, as a player. He was also the second African-American manager behind Frank Robinson, 2 times behind a guy named Robinson. Doby just kind of got lost in the shuffle, and here he was accomplishing historic deeds, but not with the same type of recognition as others.
Did he have a communication problem? You never see him smiling or having fun.
I would say he was a shy and reserved and quiet man. That's the best I could sum it up from what I've learned about him. I did speak with his son, Larry Doby Jr., who works for Madison Square Garden in New York City. So they work in similar. And he said basically the same thing. He said that, he spoke with his father. He had a lot of respect. They had a very nice, loving relationship. The one thing he said is that Larry Sr. didn't share a lot of his more painful experiences with Larry Jr. He said he preferred to dwell on the positive, not the negative. He would talk to him about the friends that he had on the Cleveland Indians team, but he never mentioned the enemies. He just didn't bother with them. He talked about the guys who shook his hand, who hung out with him, who welcomed him. Those are the guys he talked about with Larry Jr., but he never mentioned the guys that didn't shake his hand when he was introduced. He said that there were a few who didn't, but he never called them out by name. So this was Doby's way. Monty Irvin, also one of the guys being honored this year in the Cactus League Hall of Fame, was another very diplomatic and stoic statesman. He spoke, very intelligently about all this stuff, but not a lot. He was also, until later. I wouldn't say not a lot in the beginning, but later he became a voice. Bill White has always been a very active proponent of civil rights and the first guy to speak out against injustice. Sometimes it made him a little unpopular with some of his peers, but a very progressive thinker as well. Bill White was studying to be a doctor when he went into baseball, and he actually thought he was going to be a doctor.
Signed by the original New York Giants and came up to New York Giants.
He roomed with Monty Irvin in Arizona, and he hung out with Willie Mays at the Elks Club in Phoenix. Different players took different approaches to this idea of segregation. Ernie Banks, a guy who's going into the Hall of Fame, he also preferred the Cactus League Hall of Fame. He preferred not to dwell on race. He said the only race in baseball is the batter beating the throw to the base. That was his idea of a race. And he was such a congenial and well-loved fellow that it didn't seem to be as much of an issue for him. I'm sure it was, but his approach to it was different. And
how much food do you have to eat to have gotten that far? How many crazed minor league fans where you're sitting about 7 feet away, and they've got 9 beers in them, and they're talking about the Civil War.
You can only imagine. You can only imagine.
Hatred every day of their lives. This, ladies and gentlemen, is why the South shall never rise again. See, you might as well throw away those Confederate dollars. You live in a border state for the most.
I'm sorry, your feed is cutting out on me again. Yep. Okay, there you are.
Get over here, and I don't know why that's happening. I was going to ask you, since that for the most part you seem to live in a border state of Baltimore, of Maryland, what is it like racially these days in Maryland?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, it does arise quite frequently. I think we have an opportunity here in Maryland, in Baltimore, in a very racially diverse city, to communicate and live and speak with members of other races in ways that aren't available to everyone. I was talking with a friend last night, a black friend of mine, Sean Monroe, a baseball fan and a good buddy, and we were discussing issues of race and how it goes on still in ways that we had hoped would be gone by now. And we expressed appreciation for each other as being guys who didn't view the world through a prism of race. We're just friends. And that we would hope that the rest of the world might eventually all see it that way. I don't know that that'll ever happen. I think from what I've seen here, because we live so close with each other in Baltimore, that we tend to get along, at least in the circles that I walk in, better than in other places. That being said,
until somebody calls a cop instead of
that being said, there are marginalized fringes in areas where that does not hold true, and there are there's mentality that still is tied to the pre-Civil War mentality in places here in the city and in the state, and we do sit right on top of it. We're right on the Mason-Dixon line. It's a complex issue. Like I said, I prefer to walk with people who are like-minded, so I don't quite see as much of what might be the darker side of this.
Good way of going around the track, Charlie.
Yeah. That's all I can say.
All right. This has been a terrific first episode. Actually, first episode with me, but we've had two great
our shared conversation.
And let's do it same time, same bat channel next week, and we'll have another great one.
You got it, Ralph. My pleasure.
You enjoyed it, then I enjoyed it. That's how this thing goes around. If we can't have happiness talking a little ball, talking a little life, then when can you? And
that's why they call it the Hot Stove League season, because it warms the cockles of your heart during these cold winter days. I don't know what kind of weather you're having out west, but it's getting a little cold out here.
Nasty winter. It's not nasty like back east, so I never complain, because I know in a few more weeks we'll get through it. But we've had a lot of rain, and it's been cold rain, and we needed the rain and all that stuff. But I hate winters. You've got spring training coming up. It's only like another 30 days, and we're going to go down. We're going to have great shows from where I've always wanted to be, spring training. I've had other baseball memories, but not yet a spring training game. Charlie will do it next week.
You got it, Ralph.
All right, everybody out there, keep on keeping on, and we'll catch you on the flip-flop and all that stuff. Adios.
Are you still there? Okay.